Welcome to episode 286 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Erika Walther about how student-centered learning works in the real world. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. If you have a side hustle as a tutor, coach, or any other business that requires clients who need to book appointments and pay for services, check out practice.do. Practice.do is the simplest platform I've found for streamlining everything from scheduling, reminder messages, invoicing, and record keeping. It's perfect for teachers who tutor and want to keep all communication and payments in one easy, professional-looking tool for themselves and their clients. Truth for Teachers listeners can try Practice free for 7 days and get 50% off their first 3 months using the code TEACHERS. Learn more at practice.do. If you teach middle or high school, I have a special opportunity for you. I'm releasing a brand new curriculum line designed to help students find flow in the classroom and manage their time, energy, and focused attention. I'm offering it as a growing bundle right now for high school and as a beta tester version for middle school, both at a deeply discounted price only for my email subscribers and podcast listeners. You'll receive these resources before they're available to anyone else, and you'll have the opportunity to offer your suggestions that shape the development of future units so they'll better meet the needs of your students. Learn more about Finding Flow Solutions at the link in the show notes, or go to findingflowsolutions.com and get the curriculum that's designed to help students manage their time, energy, and focused attention. So I've got Erika Walther on the podcast today. She has been working in Baltimore City Public Schools since 2012. She has been a multi-classroom lead supporting K-5 students and language arts teachers in her building for the last few years, and is now a school-based literacy coach in Baltimore City Public Schools. Erika is part of our Truth for Teachers Writers Collective, and she's written a number of fantastic articles for us, including the one about today's topic of the reality of student-directed learning. You can check out the link in the show notes for more tips and practical suggestions from Erika, including how to give kids more ownership of transition times and organizing materials. What would you say to a teacher who is listening to this and thinking, what if my students can't handle more student-centered practices? I feel like that's a really common objection, and there's a lot of underlying assumptions there when we feel like our students can't handle it. What would you say to that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So the first thing I like to do here is I like to actually break down these assumptions, right? And I start with teachers asking themselves a couple of questions. And these questions are designed to really see if you as the teacher are ready to take on some release of responsibility. And the first question is, are you happy with the energy in your classroom on any given day? Second question is, are you feeling overwhelmed with how much you have to manage your students during their learning experience? And the third question is, are you leaving the school day more tired than your students are? And for me, if you answer yes to at least two of those questions, you're probably ready to try something different. And that's a really good indicator that you're ready to try some of these strategies. But my encouragement to teachers who are nervous about losing control or, things erupting into chaos and you can't bring them back is remember, we project a lot onto our students without even realizing it, positive or negative, right? And there's a lot of overlaps here with parenting. Just like with raising children, you have to show them, you have to teach them, and then you have to give them space to try to do difficult things carefully. And that's the key here, right? We don't want to keep our students from trying new things because that honestly, it stunts their development, not even just with trying new things socially, but also their neurodevelopment with trying new things and developing new connections in their brain between tasks. And in order to do that, we have to be really patient. The teacher who's sitting here thinking, my students can't handle this, that's not going to work. We can't expect our students to get it all right the first day, the first week, the first month even sometimes. But if you decide intentionally you're going to adopt a more student-centered classroom practice this year, if you stick with it and really put in the work to think through How can I give my students more ownership in this part of the day or that part of the day? By the end of the first quarter, you're going to start to see a difference. But also, you have to also remember this is going to look different across grade levels. You're not going to necessarily walk into a kindergarten classroom and see the same level of student ownership and accountability happening as you would in a fifth or sixth or a high school classroom. Now, for the teacher who's sitting there with a group of students who are presenting some serious challenges, either in behavior or emotional self regulation, I've been there, right? And sometimes your student centered accountability has to look a little different. In these cases, student leadership sometimes can be that magic sauce that perks them up and gives them that motivation. But in some cases, depending on what your students have going on, you might need to start with behavior and emotional regulation goals. Focus on that first rather than student run routines or turn in talks or academic based conferences. That can all come later, maybe by quarter 2 or by quarter 3. But there's no need to rush because your goal as their teacher, they have you, right? They got you this year. So you really should internalize the idea you have a chance to really show them what being in a classroom that feels supportive, that feels attentive to my needs, that feels centered around me and my experience, my learning. We're showing them what that feels like so that when they go up to the next grade, the next school, the next teacher, they take that motivation with them. I read years ago when I was in teacher school, there was an article, and I'll have to look and find it, but it said the impact of one caring teacher lasts for years. So don't think that, oh, well, when they leave me, they're just going to go back to what they were doing before. That's not necessarily true. We really do plant seeds, and sometimes we see those seeds grow and flourish right in front of us, and sometimes we watch them grow and flourish over time.
Yeah, that's true. And just because you don't see all of the results right away doesn't mean that it wasn't worth doing. And I think also, even if students need reminders and practice and reinforcement all the way to the end of the school year, that doesn't mean that they weren't still taking ownership. And I think that's a common misconception that, like, they should know this by now, or they should understand this by now, or we've been doing this for weeks. They should have gotten it. But every student is different, every classroom dynamic is different. And I feel like this is something that is worthwhile to keep pursuing, that all students can take some increased ownership over time of their learning. And it will grow. As you're saying, like, these are seeds that we're planting. It will grow over time, but it's more of a matter of what kind of support do they need and how much support, and that real gradual release where you're gradually giving them more responsibility rather than saying this group of kids can't handle it or this particular child can't handle it. I think a better question would be, what kind of support would this student need, or what would it look like to offer the kind of support to this student that they would need in order for them to handle it? Or what could they handle right now? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I love the idea of, well, what can they handle, right? Okay, maybe they can't handle carrying the water jug to the hallway, filling it up and bringing it back to the classroom without spilling it. Maybe that's not a reasonable expectation for that child, right? But maybe what they can do is they can go and check the hallway to let you know if there's another class out there getting water. Maybe they are able to check the light switches at the end of the day as the line is moving to make sure the lights are off. Maybe they are able to run one errand per day to build some accountability, build some responsibility, build some trust if that's an issue for them. Maybe they practice running one errand a day where they go and come back in less than 3 minutes. So it really does depend on the student, and that's really the goal here for teachers, to really get you thinking through creatively. Well, if my students can't help me with this, what could they help me with that would take some of my load off? One less thing for me to think about all the time in my little running list of tabs that are constantly open in our brains, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. There's benefits for the student and the teacher. So I feel like that's one common objection, is that, like, my students can't handle it. And I feel like the other one is, I want to release more control to my students, but I'm scared. I don't know how. I may have administrators coming into my room or people from the district all the time observing me. And if they walk in and there's a moment of chaos or something not going well, then, there could be repercussions for me. I'm just sort of stuck in this fear cycle where I don't want to let go of control, and I don't know how to not micromanage my students. Where do I start?
Absolutely. So you're going to start with one thing that you want to see change in your room. And before you start, you need to do a little bit of reflecting. So I want you to think through, what's that one thing that you would like to see change in your classroom? Just one thing. And why do you want to see that change? Right? I don't want teachers to think that they need to change to a student-centered classroom because it looks good, quote unquote, when people walk in. You need to think through, how does it affect student learning and student experiences? So for example, if you want your students to keep one another on task for you so that you can pull more groups or circulate during group work more easily, the benefit to that procedure being implemented is it frees you up to do more instruction, right? So if you're spending a lot of time monitoring compliance and following directions and task completion, you're not able to deliver effective instruction to students because you're too busy running around the classroom, making sure everybody has what they need, doing what they're supposed to do. So if that's your goal, you need to reflect, make sure you understand the benefit of that routine. Write it down if you have to. I've seen some teachers that have to write down. One of my teachers was, struggling with using table gems as a motivator. Every time she walks by a table and they're doing something really awesome, they get a little gem in their cup, and that's something that builds up towards a reward later. She was having trouble keeping the routine. One thing I suggested to her was write down why that routine is important to you and put it on your desk. And every time you get frustrated or you think, oh, I don't want to do that today, it's too much, I can't manage it, I don't want to, you look at that paper, you remind yourself why the table gems, right? And in this case, the table gems was to increase motivation and decrease off-task behavior. And just reading that reminds me, yes, it's work today. Yeah, I might not be really feeling it today, but if I keep doing it by, let's say, December, January, February, this is going to be seamless. This is going to be much, much easier. And keep that end goal in mind. But you also have to think through, especially if this is brand new for you, what are you comfortable with your students doing? Are you comfortable with one student leader, one team captain, table captain? And then think through, what language do you need them to use to redirect one another if accountability is something that you're working on? And keeping it simple is always the goal here. We're supposed to be doing X. Do you need help doing X? And that's just a simple correction without it feeling like an attack on that student. And even for me, I like a calm, quiet classroom with a really low buzz. But I also understand I have to make time to let my students experiment with different energy levels. And this helps them with their regulation when they have to calm down for the next activity. So I use a lot of signals, color codes, and I even use those little noise meter apps on your phone just to teach my students the difference between the noise levels and the time that each noise level is appropriate. And again, for me, I'm very honest about it. Most of the time, I like my room calm, quiet, collected, but I also have to think through, is this for me or is this for student? And at the end of the day, if I needed it quiet because it was for me, but I didn't need it quiet for them to complete the activity, that's a part for me to reflect on. That's a part for me to let go of the need for silence all day long. And, I understand the fear of, if an administrator walks in and chaos is all over the place, that's where your structures come into play. If your structures are clear, they're posted, they're on the board, they're in your hand, whoever is walking in your room can see you have a noise meter up, they're going to say, oh, they must be practicing different levels of noise, appropriate noise. If they can see that you have your routines posted for how to do a classroom discussion or how to do cleanup time, and you're going through each item with your students, they're going to see, oh, we're working through this process. And yes, I understand not every administrator is going to kind of do that amount of metacognition and reflection when they walk in your room, but that's really the intention there, is just to make sure you have your structures so that if you are getting feedback about your routines, if you are getting feedback around the noise in your classroom, you have a leg to stand on and say, yes, when you came in, it was loud. However, we were working on the difference between when it's appropriate to be loud and when it's appropriate to be a little bit more quiet. And I can't imagine an administrator who is going to tell you you cannot let your students practice those things, because I think we all understand they need to practice those skills.
Yes, and making fear-based decisions usually doesn't end well. When we decide what we're going to do or not do based on what someone else may think or what could go wrong or what students may not be able to handle, that's not really coming from our highest self. Our highest self is doing what you're saying here, which is going back to the why. What is the purpose here? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? What is my end goal? And when you can really articulate that, not only can you justify the way that your classroom is run if it is questioned, but also you know that you're doing what is best for your students, and you're able to keep yourself motivated through those tough times when students are still learning how to be successful and these kinds of frameworks, because you know, okay, this is my goal. This is what I can envision happening in my classroom. And we're working toward that together. And that feels, that's really exciting and energizing, and kind of helps you get through those tough moments where it's like, this is just not coming together. And I also really like your point about thinking about what you're comfortable with as a teacher, because there's a time to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And there's also a time to recognize your own needs. Like, you have needs just like your students do. Your needs are no more or no less important than anyone else in the room. And if you had a student in the room who was very overwhelmed by the amount of sensory stimulation and noise and everything, you would want to adjust things for that student, give that student a break. And I think it's fair to think about the same things for yourself as a teacher, and talk with your students about what your needs are. I think that's a great model for kids to say, hey, it's important to me that things are done this way, or, I get anxious when I feel like these kinds of things are happening. And that gives kids then the vocabulary to share their same, those same kinds of things. Like, when I'm working with a group of students, I feel overwhelmed and I need to have a break from it. We're sort of modeling the fact that people do have different needs, different preferences, and being able to understand your own needs, articulate them to other people, and make sure those needs are met is such an important skill, not only for success in school, but success in life.
Absolutely. That reminds me of one group of fourth graders that I had one year, and we were struggling. Okay, we were all struggling for a little while that year. I think that's a fair assessment. And during one of our restorative circles, I asked them. I said, "Friends, I get overwhelmed sometimes when I'm trying to get you all to come back and calm down and get back to what we're supposed to be doing." And I asked them for suggestions. And one of the suggestions from one of my little girls was, "Well, Miss Walther, could you give us a signal, or tell us a word when you're overwhelmed, and then we know we need to stop because we're overwhelming you."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Okay, let's try it." So we came up with a word. I think it was banana or orange or some kind of fruit. And so we tried it, where I would actually voice to my students when I was overwhelmed with whatever was happening. If I felt like we were kind of going a little bit too over out of into the realm of chaos, I would just say the word banana, and it worked. They respected it because we talked about it. They respected it because I made sure they knew, "Friends, I, as your teacher, I'm overwhelmed. I need us all to reset, stop, everybody talk about what are we supposed to be doing right now." And then we reset and we go on about our business. And it took some time. It wasn't perfect at first. I won't say the first time I yelled banana, everybody got back on task. But we practiced it a few times, and I explained to them why I used the word. I can't just yell it because you're too loud and I don't like it, right? I'm going to use it because, hey, friends, I just used our code word because I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of folks out of their seats. There's a lot of folks that are moving, and I'm not really sure what you are all doing because there's too much movement. So then they know, okay, she's overwhelmed by the movement. So everybody would sit down, we would reset, we would check in. What is everybody actually working on? And sometimes they would have a reason for why they're moving. I know this has happened to teachers who are listening to this, right? You go to redirect a student, and it turns out when you finally hear what they're saying, they had a perfectly legitimate reason for
Hmm.
why they were up. It just you just didn't see it in the moment because they were one of, six students who were up when they weren't supposed to be.
Hmm. Yeah, and what I'm hearing here is like, the when we talk about a student-centered classroom, what we're really talking about is humanizing our students, and humanizing ourselves as well, so that we're not just fitting into this pre-planned idea of the teacher is in charge and the students are just following the rules, but we're really making space for everyone to be themselves and to have their needs met and to feel seen. And I think that when you are vulnerable with your students in that way, when you talk about the things that overwhelm you or the things you don't like, that's a very different framing from saying, like, you're too loud, you're out of your seat, you're, doing things wrong. You're helping students understand the impact of their behavior on other people, which is something that is difficult developmentally for kids to understand. They're very centered on themselves, and it's hard for them to see things from other people's viewpoints. But I've found that even the youngest students are there will always be some in the classroom who are extremely sensitive or empathic to other people's feelings. They will tap into that and they will take charge. They will say, look at this student's face, they're unhappy right now, we should stop doing that. Or, I can hear in my friend's voice that, they're about to cry, we should ask them what's wrong. Like, there are kids who will notice that and take the lead on that. And I think what you're talking about here is, like, the juxtaposition of student-centered learning and humanizing the classroom is just, it's really interesting to me. And that's what I hear kind of as the one of the drivers of student-centered classroom. It's not just because this is some trendy thing that now, everything is supposed to be personalized and individualized for kids. There's actually a deeper benefit there, and that is not making everything so standardized, and allowing students and teachers to be more of themselves in the classroom and to really build those relationships in an authentic way. Like, the classroom community is built around knowing the likes and dislikes of other people in the room, what makes them happy, what brings them joy, what do they care about. These are the kinds of things that really build those relationships so that the classroom runs more smoothly.
It's absolutely 1000% not about compliance or quote unquote, well-trained students. It really is about creating positive and empowering experiences for your students and giving them chances to learn in a way that's going to prepare them to be independent, confident, and proficient in whatever it is that they decide to do, after they leave your classroom. We are setting our students up for a world where the values in the workplace, the values in academia, those are all shifting. And, our students have to be prepared to interact with one another in these positive ways that take other people's needs into account. And it really does start, even though we call it, student-centered learning, it really does start with the teacher. You have to be ready to be patient. You have to be ready to problem solve. And you have to be ready to try to teach a different set of skills than what you're used to. And you also have to recognize it's going to look different from school to school, from classroom to classroom. And each purpose for student-centered learning is going to be different depending on what the needs are. Some of them are going to be more social and emotional. Some of them are going to be more academically focused. And some of them are going to flip around throughout the year to address where you are.
Erika, let's wrap up with a takeaway truth. What is something that you wish every teacher understood about student-centered learning?
The most important thing is that it's not about everyone in your classroom doing the same thing at the same time the minute you say go. It's about students feeling confident and empowered in your classroom. It's about students feeling like their voice matters and feeling that there is a sense of care in your room. So when you're thinking through, do I have a student-centered classroom? One thing I'm hoping everyone listening takes away from this is, what does my classroom feel like when you walk in? And maybe you ask a colleague to come and sit for maybe 5 minutes, just give you a quick once over. When you come into my classroom, what's the immediate vibe that you get? What's the energy that you feel when you come in? And that can be a quick, low stakes way for you to just do a temperature check for yourself. If you think you're doing things in a student-centered way, but you're not sure if you want to, but you're not sure if it's necessary or if it's a good idea, sometimes just that quick little, hey, can you just pop in and let me know what you feel when you come in here, what you see first when you come in here? Just a quick, 5 minutes of their day can just help you feel whether or not the student-centered learning is either moving the direction you want it to, or whether you need to make some adjustments. So for me, when I first walk into a classroom and I want to look for some student-centered learning going on, first things first, the teacher should be hard to find at first. I should have to look around your room for a second to actually see where you are. That's the first and foremost thing. The other thing is materials are accessible to students. They're at eye level. Not everything is, up and away on high shelves or away in closets. Students are self-managing in an age-appropriate way. And of course, this looks different whether I'm walking into a kindergarten classroom and they're managing, pencils and glue versus a fourth grade classroom where maybe they're managing an entire project, or they're all on PowerPoint, or, collaborating on Google Docs or something to that effect. So I'm really just looking for mainly those three things. Is the teacher the first thing I see and hear when I walk in the room, or are the students the first thing I see and hear? Is everything accessible for students? Is the room set up for students rather than for the teacher's, aesthetic or the teacher's comfort level? And are students self-managing in an age-appropriate way?
In your article, you shared that the simplest way you found to begin increasing accountability among students is to start a regular one-on-one conferencing schedule. And you say these conferences should be no longer than 10 minutes per student on a rotating schedule on either a monthly or a bi-monthly basis. So break this down for us. How do you manage it? How do you keep track of everything with these conferences? What are you aiming to do in each conference, and so on?
Absolutely. So the purpose of the conference, right? Let's start with the purpose, is to give students motivating feedback on their learning, right? And this can serve a purpose of an academic goal that that they've set or that you've set together, or something they're working on academically, or it can be behavior or even related to their friendships, right? So you want to kind of pay attention to where your students are. Not every student in your room is going to be motivated in September by jumping, 3 reading levels by January. That might not be where they are with what motivates them. So the goal here is really to show your students you're here. Again, that word support is going to keep coming up. You're here to support them with reaching their goal. You're not here to make them jump 3 reading levels. You're here to support them to improve their reading and feel like a better reader, feel like a stronger writer. If their goal is to, have better friend relationships, because that's a struggle with some of our students, especially coming out of the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of issues with friendships, right? And how to have those friendships. What's a healthy friendship? What does healthy language sound like when you're talking with your friends, when your friends are talking to you? You can absolutely set a conferencing goal around their friendships as well. So the goal here is something that you can sustain. I say the max is 10 minutes, but usually they are much, much quicker than that. And I'm thinking 1, maybe 2 minutes, because in reality, the goal here, again, making sure your students know you're there to support them, that's the goal. It's not necessarily a full, data-driven instruction analysis that you're processing through with your students. It could be, but that's not necessary for all grade levels and for all classrooms. So I keep a simple monthly calendar printed out on my clipboard. And then behind my monthly calendar, I just have a blank legal pad. Over the years, I've just learned what I'm doing every week changes so much that having more of a structured checklist or a list to choose from, that tends not to work so much as I've switched roles in my building around. But for me, just having a simple calendar for the month and then a simple legal pad behind it for taking notes, that seems to work really well for me. And the purpose of the calendar is I just write the students' names as I conference. And you can do this one of 2 ways. You can either do it as you go, or you can record who you're going to conference with week by week. That way you can make sure by the end of the month or by the end of a 2-month cycle, depending on your class sizes, you've at least had a conversation with each student around something that they're working on. In terms of documentation, that calendar, that is my first level of documentation, right? I'm just checking off. Did I talk to Sarah? Yes, I did. Did I talk to Billy? Yes, I did. And then on the legal pad is where I note any new goals or anything that came up during the conversation. But if it was a simple feedback, I let you know that, hey, I see you've been working really hard on your fluency and I noticed you were practicing during recess yesterday. I'm really proud of you for that. Let's keep that up. And then you immediately give them one quick suggestion. When you're practicing your fluency, make sure you have a timer set just so you can see how far you got in 1 minute, and then see if you can get a little farther the next day without making any mistakes. Just something really quick, one little thing they can work on. And then the next time you loop back around to them, maybe the suggestion you gave, maybe that's what you wrote down, and you ask them, hey, did you try it with the timer? How did that work? And that's going to take you maybe 30, 45 seconds to have that conversation with that student, and you can move on. That way, if you have a student who maybe is struggling a little bit more, maybe they need a more structured, maybe a more 5 to 7 minute conference where you sit down with them and talk them through what their notebook looks like, what their folders look like. You have that time because not every student needs the full 10 minutes.
And what is the rest of the class doing while you're pulling your conferences?
Absolutely. So that depends on when I'm choosing to do it. For me, it ended up being easier to do it during small group, but not every day, because if I did it every day, I would never be able to pull my group. So I would pick a day, usually either Monday or Friday, and that would be the day that I would take one small group rotation. So one, for us, it's 15 minutes. Depends on, what your district chooses to do with that time. But for us, we have 15-minute rotations for our small groups. So I'll take one 15-minute rotation out of 3, and that 15 minutes is dedicated toward conferencing. And so if I am able to pull, 5 students for 3-minute conferences, if I'm able to pull 3 students for 5-minute conferences, I just notate however far I got and I keep rolling. As far as the other students, I do a reading cafe routine in my room for small group. So they have a menu that they follow. They have menu-based learning, some choice time that they can choose. And so they're usually doing those activities, either centers, silent reading, partner reading, or fluency, flashcards, while I am pulling my conferencing groups.
How do you explain the conferences to students? I'm guessing, especially with the youngest students, they feel very special getting this one-on-one time with you. How do you frame it in terms of what you're calling it and what the purpose is for them?
So I'll be honest, with younger students, I usually don't. I usually just make it part of my routine that I'm going to come around the room periodically and I'm going to talk with you about how you're doing. That way, it's not something that they're like, ooh, why is Miss Walther over there? Ooh, why is Miss Walther coming and sitting down next to me? I just make it something that I do. And that way they come to expect when I'm circulating, when I come to sit down at your table, I'm here to have a conversation with you. I'm not here to say, oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to, or I'm not necessarily here to grade your paper. Sometimes I'm just here to talk to you about, hey, did you try that strategy I told you about getting to bed on time last night? How'd that go? Did you eat breakfast this morning? Did you remember to ask your mom for a juice box for later? Whatever it is. That way they know not only am I keeping track of who I talk to, but I'm keeping track of what's going on with them as well. And that makes little ones especially feel, as you said, very special, but also really empowered. Wow, my teacher really cares. She really wants to make sure I have what I need to be successful today. She wants to make sure I got enough sleep. That means she cares about me. And little ones pick up on those things, and that's important.
I see. I was envisioning it like, when you pull a small group, you take them to a specific area in the classroom. So I'm thinking that you're calling them over to you. But no, you're going over to wherever they are, whatever they're working on, and just quietly talking to them. So it feels much more seamlessly integrated. It doesn't like call attention and feel like this big formal thing.
Absolutely. I usually save the formal conversations for, either older students or more serious conversations that need to have a little bit more structure.
Hmm. And tell me again, explain a little bit more about how you know who you're meeting with when. You said on a weekly basis is when you're making these decisions. Is there a way that you keep track to make sure that you've spoken to every student? And are you trying to do that in a way that is equal or equitable?
Right. So I make sure that it's equitable first and foremost, because
Okay.
that comes around to the way that I implement the routine, right? So because not every student needs 10 minutes, I'm making sure that whatever their conference time looks like, I'm getting what they need. So if I know that I have one student who really needs a more structured sit down on my calendar, maybe they're the only name that day. So if I know I need to talk to Edward for, that's going to be at least an 8 to 10 minute conversation, I'm going to just put Edward down for, my Friday group rotation to make sure I have enough time to talk to him. I keep my calendars. They go in one of my binders, and I check them, usually every month I look just to make sure, is there someone I missed this month that I haven't talked to? Or if I have a larger group of students, I'll check every 2 months. So if it's September, October, I've been getting as many conferences, as many one-on-one conversations in as I can. And in November, that's when I look and say, who haven't I met with yet? And I'll look at, and that's why it's really important to jot down either their name or their initials or their student. If you give your students, desk numbers, just make sure you are keeping track. That way, when you do go to look every month or every 2 months, you can see, oh my goodness. And I've had this happen where I say, oh my goodness, I have not met with Dora in 2 months. I need to make sure I meet with her this week. I'm putting her on for Monday. 5-minute check-in, see how she's doing, and see, I'll look at my goal. Oh, I remember in September, I asked her if she was going to set a timer to remind her when to go to bed at night. And I'll ask her about the timer. That'll take less than 5 minutes, but I'll still make sure Dora gets talked to at some point in the first week of November. So it's a process of making sure you are just jotting down for yourself somewhere, some way. You can even put it in your phone. I think Class Dojo probably has a feature for it now with their new, all the little features that they've added that you could check off. But there's all sorts of ways that you can just document, keep track for yourself so you know who you talk to each week, each month, and you're really looking for who haven't you talked to. What students that you know they're doing really well, they still need that check-in time with you, even if you don't have any, quote unquote, constructive feedback to give them. You can give them something to make them feel special, make them feel seen, and make them feel like you see the effort that you're putting in. Because one thing I do see in some classrooms is our students who tend to not ask for help as often. They are a little bit more independent, more self-driven. Sometimes they fall to the wayside in terms of us maintaining and building relationships with them. So the conferencing can be a really powerful tool for equity for not just our students who really need a lot of support, but our students who don't present as needing a lot of academic support, but still want to feel supported by us as their teacher.
Yes, and the tie-in to the increasing student ownership is that they know that you are giving them constructive feedback, that you're noticing what's working, what's not, and you're providing that support, which I would imagine feels very empowering to them and makes them feel like more in control of what they're doing, feeling like they are noticed, like they're seen, and therefore able to move more confidently through the routines and in their academic progress.
Absolutely. In my classroom culture, when we're having classroom conversations, Socratic seminars, group discussions, I make sure I infuse that language into how students are talking to one another as well, so that when I come up and I ask you a question, it's not an isolated incident. So, for example, we're always giving each other feedback after somebody speaks for the class or gives a presentation, and it's very simple. Hey class, what did so-and-so do well in their presentation? And then the follow-up question is, what is one idea you have for that student? I don't say, what could they do better? I don't say, what's a piece of feedback? I don't say, what's one constructive criticism? I just say, what is one idea that you would like to share with this student about their project? And that gives them that language to say, well, one idea I had was maybe you could have. And that way the suggestion doesn't come across as a jab or an attack. It comes across as, ooh, that made me think of this. Have you tried that? And now we're having a collaborative conversation. And again, that's where the magic really starts to happen. Students really start to see, oh my goodness, everybody in this room cares about me doing well, right? They're even willing to give me ideas to make my stuff better. That's awesome. And they feel incredibly empowered. And then that just keeps them focused on the learning, right? So if you notice your students are really struggling with, they don't understand why we're working on decoding every day, why we're doing these sight words every day, that starts to ingrain in them, oh, right, I'm here to improve my skills in blank. And that's really where you start to see that shift happen.
Yeah, and your article talks about the importance of ensuring that students have opportunities to interact with one another in an academic way, with the idea being that as students practice speaking to one another respectfully about their tasks, the better they become at keeping one another on task. And then that frees the teacher to circulate around the room and do these mini conferences with students and to provide that kind of individual feedback. Can you say more about how you teach and reinforce this kind of respectful academic talk among students?
Absolutely. So you have to be very, very specific. Role play is really crucial here to teach students that how they say something is what really matters. So I'm very careful and very intentional around giving students specific language to use for specific situations. For example, if my team captain is practicing making sure everyone at her table is on task, here's what it might sound like. Team, we're supposed to be writing our names on our paper. Does everyone have their name written on their paper? I always teach them to lead with questions instead of accusations or assumptions. And I model this for them with how I talk to them. Which way do you prefer to be spoken to? You don't have your name written on your paper versus does everyone have their name written on their paper? Sounds very different, right? Comes across very different. It's a redirection without a correction. So when students are getting ready to start a task and the team captain or even myself wants to make sure they're clear, I say, do you understand the directions? I don't say, you don't understand the directions, do you? Because you're not doing anything. That's never going to come out of my mouth. It's always going to be a question. Did you understand the directions? Do you understand the directions? Do you need help with the directions? Or do you need help with whatever the task is? And that lets students know, if I notice you're not doing something, I'm not going to assume ill intent. I'm going to ask you what's going on. That way you can tell me, I need help, or, oh, I lost my pencil, or, oh, I actually wanted to go get a drink of water first. That gives them that opportunity to communicate to me openly, respectfully, and in an empowering way, that if they have a need that needs to be met before they can focus on the work, we have 2 seconds to talk about it before it turns into a behavioral issue.